is expected from WHO is declaring the public health emergency of international concern as early as possible, based on the factors. And as Mike said, the highest emergency as far as international health regulation is concerned was declared on January 30th. And during that time, as Maria said, there were less than 100 cases. And to be specific, 82 confirmed cases on January 30. Outside China. Of course, in China we had more cases, but outside China we had only 82 cases. And most of these cases were actually in the neighborhood. And most of them, since they're in the neighborhood, the rest of the world is still reporting no cases. We had few in Europe, and I can read that for you, what was reported from Europe. We had 5 from France, 1 from Finland, 4 from Germany. That makes it 9. 10 actually. 10 cases in Europe when we declared global emergency. In Africa, we didn't have any case. In United Arab Emirates, from the Middle East, United Arab Emirates had 4 cases. So you can see it for yourself. We triggered the highest level of emergency when the rest of the world had only 82 cases and no deaths. And then to add to that, global emergency is discussed among experts. It's not just one director general who just comes out and declares. We have experts representing all over the whole world coming together as experts and discussing. And they met on 23rd January. They couldn't agree, they were divided. Then, of course, they continued for a second day. Still, they couldn't divide it. They couldn't agree. Of course, they agreed to meet in 6-7 days and then met for a second time on January 30 when they, based on the criteria we have, they were convinced that the criteria is met to declare this global emergency. So I want to be clear again. The most important thing which is expected as a declaration from WHO is the global emergency declaration on January 30. And that was declared based on experts' opinion that was drawn from all over the world, who used the criteria to recommend to me that this is already a global emergency, and that consensus led to a declaration of global emergency from WHO, which I announced myself. So looking back, I think we declared the emergency at the right time, and when the world had enough time to respond, when the rest of the world had enough time to respond. I repeat again, there were only 82 cases and no deaths. That was enough to cut it from the bud. Enough. That was January 30. And this is more than 2 months and 21 days ago, close to 3 months now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will try now to go to Democratic Republic of Congo. We have Sami there from Congo Czech. Sami, can you hear us?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Je voulais savoir à quel regard l'OMS porte en général sur tous les médicaments en train d'être développés sur le continent africain pour lutter contre la Covid-19. C'est l'exemple de Covid organique qui est développé, qui a été validé au Madagascar. Il y a également la vipirine au Bénin et même en RDC chez moi, où plusieurs autres médicaments sont proposés, bien que non encore validés par le gouvernement.
If I can begin, we really welcome all of the innovation we've seen around the world in both repurposing older drugs or drugs that are used for other indications and putting them into trials to see what impact they will have on COVID-19. We are also very grateful for all the investment and work going on for developing new molecules that may prove ultimately to be effective in the treatment. And we maintain a global database of all of those drugs and all of those trials. And we're encouraging all innovators to work through their national regulatory authorities, their national institutes of health, to ensure that any trials that are commenced with proper support and proper authority, proper ethical approval. And Africa has a strong track record in doing such work, and I'd like to congratulate the institutions in DR Congo, especially, and Jean-Jacques Muyembe and his staff, because we have a monoclonal treatment which is highly successful for Ebola now, and that was developed in Congo with collaboration with NIH in the United States, but has been one of the first proven therapeutics against Ebola, a life-saving intervention developed in DR Congo and has been used successfully to treat in the last outbreak. So again, there is a tremendous amount of innovation going on in Africa in general. Maria mentioned South Africa, and again, it is interesting the way in which South Africa is bringing the disease under control, and how African countries are actually in many ways, in some ways, showing the way. The strategy in South Africa was based on preparation, primary prevention, lockdown and enhanced surveillance. 67 mobile lab units around the country, 28,000 community health workers trained in case detection, and I think over 120,000 tests completed with a 2.7% positivity rate, which is incredible, that much testing for that return. So we're seeing performance levels there again, congratulating the government and institutions of DR Congo for the superb way in which Ebola has been brought under control. We still have some way to go. So I think in general, we need to leverage the capacities that exist in Africa, the innovation, the science. We need to connect those scientists, we need to connect those laboratories, those clinicians across Africa. Again, the Director General, working with our Regional Director, Chidi Moeti, and the African Union, have been heavily engaged in trying to drive innovation, both in the public and the private sector across Africa. And it will be very important that studies in Africa are led by principal investigators from African institutions, and obviously reaching out to collaborators in other parts of the world. And I trust that those capacities exist. And again, to point to the rapid evolution of capacity. At the beginning of this epidemic, and I will point to the fact that WHO began distributing validated testing kits in Africa on the 24th of January, which was 7 days, 8 days a week before the declaration of the global public health emergency. But it was the laboratories at Institut Pasteur in Senegal and NICD in South Africa that trained all of the laboratory technicians from all over Africa, who then met up with their new reagents when they returned home. We're also seeing the use of high-throughput diagnostic systems in places like Kenya, where superb technology that's been provided by the Global Fund and others has been repurposed to use for high-throughput diagnostics in many African countries. We're working very closely with the Global Fund, with UNICEF, with UNITAID, to accelerate the availability of reagents for those high-throughput systems. So I think we're seeing very, very good things happen, but we're very cognizant of the challenges. We've seen almost 250% increase in cases in Sudan in the last week, in Somalia nearly 300%, and in many other countries like Tanzania, Mali, Congo, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Capo Verde and Eritrea, increases of more than 100% in the last week. With many other countries in Africa, case increases somewhere between 30 and 90%. So we are at the beginning in Africa. I believe that with a focus on preparation, on surveillance, on community mobilization, and on the undoubted capacity for innovation and science in Africa, that we can avoid the worst of this pandemic. But we are also cognizant, as the DG said, that there are lives and there are livelihoods, and the impacts of long-term lockdowns are having a severe impact. So we have to find a way forward in Africa that can balance the risk of the virus against the risk to people's livelihoods and people's lives at the same time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. Now from DRC we will go to Greece, where we have Costa from ERT. Can you hear us, Costa, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for taking my question. My question is about COVID-19 and sports. Can you please confirm that there was in the last days a teleconference between WHO and UEFA and the proposal to suspend the football championships until the end of 2020?
I can start, and perhaps Mike would like to. I'm not aware of the call, but it could have taken place, but I'm just not aware of it. What WHO does is we provide recommendations on how people can take decision about these types of sporting events and mass gathering events, for that matter, and what needs to be put into consideration, whether to hold it or whether not. The decisions are with them, and we support them in taking those decisions.
Now, we will follow up, as I'm not aware that there was any specific call, but we do all the time engage with organisers of major events, and we've been doing so with the International Olympic Council, with FIFA, with many others. So we've been engaged with religious organisations and so many more. And those engagements are frequent and are happening at different levels of our organisation. I think UEFA is the European institution, so we'll check with our European office. What's most important in this, in terms of sporting events and others, is sporting events, especially large sporting events, representing themselves mass gatherings. And bringing those types of events back online is going to require some very, very careful planning. We've got a lot of sports fans here in WHO, and we miss our sport too. But we all want to be safe. And therefore, I think sporting organisations and governments, working both nationally and internationally, are really going to have to look at how do we adapt. And this is one of the things we've been discussing internally here, is on the one hand we have the science and we have the evidence. On the other hand, we have the practical reality of life. Now, how do we adapt our evidential standards to what is the need to live and the need to manage risk at society level? If we all accept that there's no such thing as zero risk, the danger for governments at the moment, or the challenge they face, is that if they do something and there's any risk and then there's a consequence, they're going to be blamed for the consequence. No one will remember that they did that on the balance of risks. They'll only remember something bad happened. Therefore, when you bring a mass of people together and something goes wrong, people won't be shouting afterwards, oh, we were the ones that wanted that to happen. It won't be that. People will say, why did you let that happen? Why did you let so many people come together? And it's your fault now because you've let all these people come together and now we have another outbreak. So what we have to do is come to a new contract, a new social contract that allows governments and communities to engage, to co-manage the risks and say, okay, what risks are we prepared to accept, manage, reduce? So can